For centuries, these two islands in the South Pacific were home to Māori people. They call it Aotearoa. The indigenous Māori population was rooted in a sacred relationship with the land and surrounding waters. They organized society in an intricate system of tribes and subtribes. They flourished. But by the end of the 1800s, roughly 60% of them were dead, due to new diseases, displacement, and war, all caused by Western colonizers who called the islands New Zealand. Over the course of several decades, more than 90% of collectively owned Māori land had been taken by the British Crown.
They not only took the land, but they took our river. That river meant everything to us.
There were hundreds of my ancestors that were taken.
We lost language, we lost land, we lost our way of life.
You kind of wonder at times, who am I? What am I?
But today, something groundbreaking is happening here. A kind of reparations, or as they refer to them in Aotearoa, settlements. Land and cash settlements for Māori, accompanied by historic formal apologies from the government.
Another first, this law includes an apology.
Our iwi received $87 million in cash from the Crown.
17 land blocks have been returned, with deeds and titles.
$170 million. Peanuts. It really is peanuts.
I'm here in Aotearoa to take a closer look at Māori people's long fight for sovereignty over their lands and all of the mixed emotions and outcomes that come with it. I'm also here to explore how a similar movement for redress could gain more steam in the United States for Native Americans and Black people descended from those enslaved in America. Māori people have gotten the British Crown to recognize the harms of their pillaging, apologize, and pay. What can we learn about reparations from their story? At the end of the 18th century, about 100,000 Māori lived in Aotearoa and were part of various tribes, still known today as iwi, and subtribes, hapu. Though they weren't functionally a nation, they controlled every corner of the islands. But in the first half of the 19th century, Europeans began to arrive by thousands of ships, especially people from England, far beyond the small settlement of British missionaries already living there.
As disputes start to occur between the new arrivals and Māori, particularly around use of land.
The settlers saw the land as property, something to be owned, which was in conflict with the Māori view. And there were new outside threats too. Māori learned that the French and other Westerners wanted their lands. So they began signing this Declaration of Independence in 1835. Rangatira, or Māori chiefs, used the document to make a firm statement to the rest of the world that authority within Aotearoa rested with them. The document declared He Whenua Rangatira, which translates to an independent state. With new nationhood, they petitioned King William IV for support and protection. And a few years later, the British government and Māori chiefs saw the need for another formal document.
There were opportunities to both engage further with the British Crown as treaty partners and having a strategic political but also trading partner.
In 1840, more than 500 Māori chiefs signed this document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, with the British Crown. Te Tiriti is the foundational document at the center of the story. Its creation opened up the gateway to the unlawful British colonization of the islands. It's been vigorously debated because there are stark differences between the Māori and English texts of the treaty. The Māori text says that the rangatira have tino rangatira tanga, which translates to absolute authority over their lands, resources, homes, and tonga, or treasured possessions. But the English text states that the rangatira cede to Her Majesty the Queen of England all rights and power of sovereignty.
Those big differences, one version saying you ceded sovereignty, the other one saying actually you get to govern yourselves and look after yourselves. You know, it's quite fundamental really in terms of how things rolled out across our history.
Within a Māori worldview, within a Māori philosophy, it's not actually possible to suddenly decide to give up that sovereignty to someone else.
The British proceeded to assert control over the islands after the treaty was signed, claiming that under British law, they had the power to set up a government. They appointed a governor, William Hobson, and formally established Aotearoa as a colony by the end of 1840.
There were land sales, or purported land sales, where they engaged with perhaps one of the 100 owners, or 100 people that had rights to a piece of land. They'd engage with one person that effectively would sell the entire block.
Where I'm from in Wairoa, there was a really big, significant purchase of land, which was framed as a sale and purchase, but my ancestors were told by the Crown Purchase Agent, either you sell us this land or we will confiscate it. And so it's those kinds of coercive practices which also resulted in significant land loss.
There was resistance of our people to that happening. Conflict over land and resource came to a head in 1860.
In the decades-long New Zealand Wars, Māori people battled to protect their land, but they were severely outnumbered by British troops, who killed more than 2,000 Māori. Through the wars, the British confiscated massive amounts of land, supported by a new law that said the Crown could seize the land of anyone who had rebelled against the Queen. Māori were allowed to defend their claims to land in court, but mounting a defense usually included prohibitively expensive legal fees and travel costs. This land confiscation triggered a breakdown of the Māori economic base and disrupted the communal culture of Māori identity. Plus, diseases that European colonizers brought to Aotearoa continued to kill Māori in large numbers. In 1840, shortly after Europeans began arriving by the shipload, 80,000 Māori lived on the islands. By 1896, only 42,000 remained. Meanwhile, the Pākehā population, those who were white or non-Māori, ballooned to 701,000 people. An estimated 88% of Māori lands were taken. It wasn't until decades later that Māori activists would force the British Crown to reckon with this history.
Everything as a child growing up in the first 15 years of our lives, for me, was around how to be a Pākehā. Everything was geared up how to talk like them, dress like them, sing like them.
By the 1950s, New Zealand's government had rewritten the history of the Crown's colonization into a rosy story. One newspaper from the early 1900s quoted a politician who said, "The Māoris had always been loyal to the British Empire. New Zealand was a country that had never been conquered or annexed. It was a mutual agreement."
There has been a real perpetuation of a myth that, New Zealand has great race relations. And often Te Tiriti o Waitangi is held up as the example of that, is to say, look, we negotiated this sovereignty by consent.
But in practice, the oppression of the Māori had continued for more than 100 years after the Treaty of Waitangi had been signed.
For the first time in history, a reigning British monarch visits her Maori subjects.
Māori military men who fought for the crown in both world wars were not given the same benefits as Pākehā after their return. Disparities became glaringly apparent by the mid-century. Compared to Pākehā, Māori had poor health outcomes, like double the child mortality rate. They were over 5 times more likely to be incarcerated and both Māori men and women had lower incomes than their Pākehā counterparts. And in 1953, the Crown introduced laws that further forced some Māori to sell their land. Those laws, along with World War II, helped incite a mass migration of Māori from rural lands to cities.
Living in Christchurch was a whole experience. Living in a white town, you kind of hold your breath and go, holy hell. I never experienced racism like that.
As a young boy, I wasn't too sure what the hell was going on, but I knew there was something wrong.
I can't help but think about the similarities here between how Black Americans and Native Americans were treated in the United States around the same time. Many Black Americans and Native Americans enlisted and fought in World War II. But upon their return from the war, they were shut out of benefits that were extended to white Americans, like home loans and educational funding provided by the GI Bill. Black Americans were segregated through redlining, and the benefits didn't extend to Native Americans living on tribal lands. Over time, the compounding impacts of racial discrimination in the U.S. showed up the same ways they did for Māori populations, with a higher infant mortality rate, Black incarceration rate that was just over 5 times higher, and much lower net worth. But by the 1960s, with many Māori now gathered in cities, they were better positioned to challenge leadership.
In America, Black people are treated very much as colonized people because we're used, we're brutalized. The police in our community occupy our area, our community as a foreign troop occupies territory.
The advent of television helped Māori tune into the Black Power movement and the activism of Native Americans in the United States.
But the people have to stand up and demand. They have to understand that they have a right.
In America, you had quite a few movers and shakers that made the difference, and that was all through marching.
Members of the activist group Ngāta Matoa channeled these lessons into their protests. They were part of a movement to revitalize the Māori language, Te Reo Māori, which had been actively suppressed in schools for decades. And later, Ngāta Matoa helped launch one of the biggest protests in Aotearoa history, the Land March of 1975.
It's been joined since early this morning by young and old, and in spite of rain, which set in late in the morning, the march's spirits are still high.
It's a huge project. A lot of our people actually didn't support us. They think we're a little bit naive or a little bit nutty.
The protest action needed someone who could rally Māori together.
Her name was Whina Cooper.
Whina Cooper was a respected Māori elder, descended from the Te Rarawa iwi, who dedicated her life to Māori land rights and to the rights of Māori women. She was nearly 80 years old at the time of the march.
We need somebody like that can reach to the hearts and the minds. So we got the face, we need a slogan. And so we came up with a slogan, not one more acres of Māori land be sold. Not one more acre.
After all these 135 years, we have only 2 million acres left.
The march took 29 days and grew to include 5,000 people. They came from all over the North and South Islands. And when they arrived at Parliament, marchers presented a petition signed by 60,000 people that laid out their goals. They were here to establish new laws for Māori land based on their own cultural values, communal ownership of land within the tribe.
Protest movements anywhere in the world makes a difference. If you don't protest, nothing will happen. And people will think everything's all right. It's not all right.
The Crown, long reluctant to acknowledge the harms of its colonization, was forced to respond. They established the Treaty of Waitangi Act of 1975 to investigate contemporary breaches of the 1840 treaty. But it wasn't until after another decade of protests that the Māori won the right to give the investigating tribunal retrospective powers, the ability to investigate grievances going all the way back to 1840. While this tribunal could only offer recommendations for government action, it opened the door for a kind of reparations. The government decided to create a pathway to dozens of land and cash settlements that are ongoing today.
So I was really excited about that, to be able to do some more research for us there to share our story. for us to be able to have these sort of type of conversations. At last we can talk to each other about it. At last we can have a voice, we can sing about it. I don't have a problem with it. But in products, it's just, there seems to be something not quite right.
The settlement was the right thing to do. The value of the settlement, I think, was wrong. When you think about it now, it's only a drop in the bucket.
There are about 138 government-recognized iwi today, and they all have their own specific historical grievances with the Crown. As of 2022, there have been nearly 80 settlements passed into law. These claims generally work like this. Iwi must register a historical claim with the Waitangi Tribunal to have their grievances heard and to proceed in the settlement process. If their claims are deemed well-founded, they can begin the process of direct negotiation with the Crown. After what can be years of back and forth, eventually they write the final deed of settlement that both parties sign. To receive the settlement assets, iwi must set up a governance entity that administers the winds on behalf of the community, often putting the money towards business development, health, and education for the entire group, not checks to individuals. The list of what Māori are seeking is long. It includes millions of dollars, apologies, the return of land, waters, fisheries, minerals, and the restoration of Te Reo Māori, the Māori language. And no two settlements, or the experience of negotiating them, are the same. But many people look here, to Waikato-Tainui, the first iwi to settle in 1995, as a model for what settlements could be. As the first iwi to settle, they laid the groundwork for all the settlements that followed. In 1995, the Crown recognized the unlawful theft of more than 1 million acres of Waikato lands in the 1860s and settled with the iwi for $170 million.
This was a time in this country where settlements were new. It was against public opinion. It certainly was a courageous move on the part of the government at that time.
Queen Elizabeth signed this treaty settlement, which to this day is one of the largest sums of money given to an iwi.
This is the first time the Queen has ever signed any law in public.
That was the pinnacle of all apologies. Most apologies are given by the Crown, by the government. In this instance, it was the only apology made by Queen Elizabeth II. That we were the only tribe to get that formal apology in a signed letter from her is huge, because it was an admission of their guilt, of their wrongdoing and their injustice.
The settlement was successful, but also controversial. For one, the iwi was criticized for siding with the Crown just months after dozens of iwi nationwide rejected the government's $1 billion fiscal cap on the settlements. And the settlement only provided the return of around 30,000 acres.
It's an insignificant amount of land when you compare with that which we lost.
One big win was the Te Rapa Air Force Base, which they developed into a shopping district, a move to bring them economic independence. The settlement also included the $15 million Waikato-Tainui College, which has helped them invest in education.
Anyone who want to do business in our tribal area, they'll come talk to us. We're undeniable now. Things have changed.
In 2010, Waikato-Tainui finalized another settlement. This time it was for the longest river in New Zealand, from which the iwi takes its name, the Waikato River.
We got an agreement that gave us equal say, and anything that happened on the river, in the river, around the river. So for me as a negotiator for my iwi, for my tribe, it was the greatest honor of all. The job that we did was minor compared to the hundreds of our ancestors who died in the battles for our land, for who we are, for our way of life. They paid a huge sacrifice for us to sit in those offices and try to get a deal with the government in order to resolve our outstanding claims against the Crown.
For other iwi, the settlements haven't been as large, and they've taken decades to negotiate. I'm here at Ngāti Maru's official settlement ceremony, where a representative from the Crown is going to deliver an official apology.
The Crown makes the following apology to Ngāti Māori. The Crown's many breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi left Ngāti Māori feeling like refugees in their own homeland. Its confiscation of half of the rohe of Ngāti Māori was indiscriminate and unwarranted. The Crown acknowledges that. It imprisoned members of Ngāti Māori, assaulted the human rights of the people residing there. It forcibly removed many inhabitants, destroyed and desecrated their homes and sacred buildings, stole heirlooms. The Crown expresses profound remorse and apologises.
Ngāti Māoru's settlement included $30 million in cash, the return of 17 land titles, and the right to purchase 36 Crown properties, including the Te Wera forest.
I am humbled to have delivered these words to you today. I know how many of you will be thinking of those loved ones who were lost before they had a chance to hear the Crown apologise for its wrongdoing. I pay tribute to your tupuna.
We all know once you lose your land, you lose your culture, you lose your reo, you lose your identity, you lose everything. So we've been in a process of reclamation and rejuvenation and revitalisation.
Ultimately, many Māori see the settlements as an avenue for empowerment and restitution, but they don't ignore the issues.
Some iwi have expressed that they don't necessarily believe the Crown apology to be genuine, and it's something that the Crown does for their own benefit to release themselves of, I don't know, perhaps burden or guilt over those historical breaches. Ultimately, the ministers of the Crown get the final decision on the level of quantum, the level of financial redress, you know, what land parcels might be available to come back.
What we're giving away in likes of land, water, the air we breathe is worth billions.
All stolen property should be returned. It's like a car, it's a stolen car. Your car was taken with everything in the car, everything taken. Then they give your car back with no motor in it. It's just the wheels, you can't move it. You can't drive it. Yeah, we want the whole car.
Today, Aotearoa is 27 years into their settlement process. For some, these settlements have meant life-changing differences in business opportunities and education. In many categories, like median household income, Māori outcomes have improved, but they still fall behind Pākehā.
I see settlements as a reparation. I think reparation is a far too nice a word. We can't embrace the cruelty, the injustice, the loss of life. This is about righting a wrong. We're talking about blood here.
These kinds of complications are echoed in the reparations debate in the United States. Some people say that there's no amount of money that could ever compensate for slavery or for land loss. And people say that reparations would further divide the United States. But what the Māori process shows us is that you have to start with acknowledging the past.
An apology for slavery and the Jim Crow laws, which for a century after emancipation.
The Senate apologized for slavery and Jim Crow in 2009.
Today, the Senate will unanimously make that apology,
but made no mention of reparations. And while the U.S. apologized to Native Americans for acts of violence and neglect, the statement was largely buried in the back of a 2010 defense bill. Even though Aotearoa can't be an exact model for the United States, Māori have a direct message for people in the U.S. The fight for reparations is worth it.
I know it sounds that's like never going to happen, but truly, there comes a point where they have to start to listen.
The struggle might be long and full of uncertainty, but if the U.S. continues to push the reparations debate forward, people here could gain land, money, better policies, and new pathways to healing. Just like the Māori.